Welcome. My name is Christopher Riopel. I'm the curator of post-1800 paintings here at the National Gallery in London, and it is my pleasure to inaugurate an extraordinary Facebook Live experiment which over the next hour or so will take us literally around the world to look at 5 of the most famous paintings in the world. They are all by the same artist, Vincent van Gogh, and they are all of the same subject, his great sunflower paintings. You see the London painting behind me. These paintings have an extraordinary appeal to the public. People come to our museum and to the 5 museums around the world where you can see versions of the sunflowers in their tens of thousands to look at these works. After I tell you a bit about the London painting, we will then travel to those other 5 cities, 5 museums in 5 countries. They are the home of Van Gogh studies, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, Holland, then the Neue Pinakothek in Munich, Germany, on to the Philadelphia Museum of Art in the United States, and we will end at the Saiji Togo Memorial Museum of Art in Tokyo. Each one of these museums has sunflowers. They are all subtly different one from the other, and together they tell a remarkable story. 3 years ago, in 2014, we here in London had the opportunity to bring together 2 versions of the sunflowers, our own with the painting in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. We saw then how popular they were with the general public, how hungry people were to learn about the paintings and the extraordinary story surrounding them. We thought, wouldn't it be remarkable to bring all 5 pictures together, but very quickly realized that that would be impossible. Some are very fragile, all of them indeed are fragile, the distances are great, and museums would be loath to give up these pictures even briefly, so popular are they with their public. So we thought that this might be a good alternative to us travel around the world to see them, and that is what we will do. We are looking here at the London version, which was painted in the summer of 1888, probably in August of that year. Vincent van Gogh, the Dutch artist, had a few months earlier come down to Arles in the south of France, in Provence. There he wanted to set up what he called the Studio of the South, to paint in the brilliant light of the south of France. And he wanted to attract other artists to come and join him there and together to paint in a new way in the brilliant sunshine. Most important, he wanted to bring his friend Paul Gauguin down, to attract him to come and paint with him. And this seems to have been the origin of the 5 pictures we will be looking at today. He began by painting 2 versions, probably our version and the painting now in Munich, to decorate the bedroom of Paul Gauguin that Gauguin would use when he arrived in Arles. The paintings would be waiting there as a kind of welcome for him. They would also be a symbol of Vincent's own relationship to Gauguin. He told him that he would follow Gauguin's direction in inventing a new style of painting, and what better symbol of that following the leader than the sunflower, which follows the path of the sun across the sky. And so he began to paint these works as he waited for Gauguin to arrive. A bit later, my colleague at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, Axel Ruger, will tell us something about the differences among these paintings. But when Gauguin finally arrived and finally saw these pictures, including the London picture, he realized right away, it seems to us, that here Vincent, the sometimes difficult Dutchman, the endlessly enthusiastic Dutchman, had found his great topic. huge vases spilling over with these flowers of the South, and he had also found a new way to paint them. In the case of the London picture, with all kinds of yellows dancing across the canvas, with only a very few touches of other color. For example, he signs the vase in which the sunflowers stand with Vincent in bright blue, standing in very strong contrast to the yellow of the flowers. You will see that in the two of the versions, in Munich and in Philadelphia, he has painted the background pale blue as well. So he's always making changes as he goes through, but as Gauguin recognized, and as others would come to recognize, this symbol of life, of sunshine, of brilliant color would come to represent the zenith of Van Gogh's creativity at this moment in his life of huge creativity. Now, the experiment with Gauguin did not end well. They worked together for several months in the autumn of 1888. It was not entirely successful because they found that their approach to art was not the same. Gauguin veering more towards abstraction, simplification of form, Van Gogh always wanting to stick with the motif in front of him and to capture life exactly as it was. And at Christmas of 1888, they broke. They had a feud. Gauguin stomped off. Van Gogh had what we would call a nervous breakdown, cut off part of his ear, was admitted to hospital. Early in 1889, however, having recovered, he began to paint this motif again, not least because Gauguin, now back in Paris, Gauguin realized that this was his friend's great theme, and asked him to paint a version to send to him that he would keep as a memorial of his work. And the painting we will be looking at in Amsterdam almost certainly was one of those replicas now done early in 1889. The 5 paintings done in these 2 sessions of high creativity are, as I say, all closely related one to the other, but in each case, Vincent is slightly rethinking what he is doing, changing the number of blooms in the vase in some case, showing the flowers in different states of preservation. Some are more faded than others, some are in their full richness of their bloom. But Gauguin's realization that this was Van Gogh's great subject began to spread after the death of Van Gogh. At his death, he was virtually unknown, but remarkably quickly his fame began to spread across Europe, and then in America, and then around the world. And it is, of course, very interesting how the London picture came to the National Gallery. It came in the early 1920s when the gallery received money from the great industrialist Samuel Courtauld to buy modern pictures for the nation. Right away, there was a decision made that Van Gogh had to be included in any collection of modern painting. So literally in less than 30 years, that he was central to modern art was already an established truism. At first, the Courtauld Fund and the trustees of the National Gallery acquired one of Vincent's great portraits, that of the postmaster Roulin, done at the same time as the Sunflowers, an incredibly vivid picture which is now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But after a few months, the trustees of the National Gallery returned to the family of Vincent van Gogh, from whom they had bought the picture, to say, no, we're the National Gallery. For us, we have to have one of his most important works. We have to have sunflowers. And so the great portrait of the Postmaster Roulin was returned, and this sunflowers came instead. If only we had kept both of them, it would have been wonderful. But this is very important in telling us that already by the early 1920s, the fame of the sunflowers had spread around the world, and even in London, which was always rather resistant to modern art, it was a struggle to get modern paintings into this collection in some cases. Already the trustees were convinced that the highest statement of Van Gogh's art lay in these pictures of sunflowers in their vase, and that if we were to have a Van Gogh, this was what we must have. It came then. Over the years, happily, we have been able to assemble a larger collection of that with some of marvelous pictures from every stage of his relatively brief career, but it is and remains always the sunflowers at the head of that display of Van Gogh's works. Now, one of the things we learned when we were able to bring together the Amsterdam and London pictures 3 years ago was to look very carefully at the different ways in which the flowers were painted, the very different ways in which paint could be applied, the gamut of yellows that Van Gogh was exploring, how he made distinctions between them, how he worked in greens and blues to make those distinctions work, and to work chromatically even from a very great distance. And one of the powers of the pictures you will be seeing today is how strongly they address us even from far across a room. And this chance to look at 2 of them together as I said, suggested to us that we can learn a great deal more even by looking at all 5 of them together, thinking about what this artist was doing by taking up the motif of the sunflowers and then by repeating it 5 times, each time amending, altering, making subtle distinctions between the pictures. At this point, having looked at the London picture, its glowing forms, I want to pass over to our colleague, the director of the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, Axel Ruger, former colleague of ours here, indeed at the National Gallery before he went to Amsterdam, and ask Axel to tell us something about the distinctions between the pictures and what it is we can be looking for as we compare these 5 versions of the sunflowers as we make our way around the world.